Dakota Territory, March 1887. The woman offered Eli Rourke her last silver dollar to do the one thing he had refused to do for 4 years. Take a passenger across Red Willow during icebreak. He did not touch the coin. He looked past her at the river instead. The surface appeared solid from the bank, white plates of late winter ice packed together beneath a thin skin of meltwater. But the current had already opened dark seams between them. Every few seconds, one plate rose over another with a slow wooden groan, then dropped back into the brown water. "No crossing today," Eli said. The woman stood beside a small bay mare whose flanks were streaked with road salt and mud. She was young enough that the exhaustion in her face looked out of place, and tired enough that she had stopped trying to hide it. A canvas satchel hung across her body beneath her coat. Under the other side of the coat was a baby, bundled close to her chest. "I only need the ferry once," she said. "That is usually how people drown on it." Her eyes sharpened. "I was told this was the shortest road to Cedar Bluff." "It is, and Cedar Bluff is on the other side." "It is. Then name your price." "I just did. No crossing." She looked at the river, then at the ferry platform tied hard against the landing. The craft was a broad timber deck riding between guide ropes built for freight wagons, cattle, and people who had no patience for a 28-mile detour. It looked dependable from a distance. Eli knew which boards had split grain. He knew where the upstream cable had begun to shine from strain. He knew the river under it better than he knew any living person. The woman closed her hand around the dollar. "All right," she said. She turned the mare away from the landing. For half a second, Eli thought she had accepted his answer. Then she led the horse toward the ice shelf 50 yards upstream. He moved before he had time to decide whether to be angry. "Mom!" She kept walking. He caught the mare's bridle. The animal stopped. The woman did not. "Let go. If you put that horse on the river, you will make it 20 yards if you are fortunate. I have been fortunate before. That is not the same as knowing what you are doing." Her face changed at that. Not much. Just enough for him to see that he had stepped on something she had been carrying a long way. "I know exactly what I am doing," she said. "I am trying to reach a hearing by Monday noon with proof that my husband paid for our farm before he died. If I am not there, a man with more money than I have will tell a judge I abandoned it. So unless you have another road in your pocket, let go of my horse." The baby stirred beneath her coat. Eli looked down. A small hand had worked free of the blanket. 5 red fingers opened against the cold air, then vanished again when the woman tucked the blanket tighter. "What is the child's age?" he asked. 7 months. "And you were going to take him onto breaking ice. I was going to cross a river. You were going to lose a horse, a child, and yourself in that order." She held his gaze. "Then show me another way." Behind them, the ferry cable gave a sound like a rifle shot. Both of them turned. One of the iron staples at the upstream anchor had shifted half an inch out of the post. The cable snapped tight again. Eli's hand remained on the mare's bridle. The woman stared at the staple. "That rope is opening near the anchor," she said. Eli looked at her. "Cable. Your cable is opening near the anchor." He followed her line of sight. Beneath the wet shine, several wire strands had lifted from the main twist where the cable wrapped the timber post. He had checked it that morning. He had not seen that. "How did you?" "My husband hauled timber. I spent 6 years loading stickers beside him. Wire tells you before it fails if you know where to look." The river struck the ice shelf again. The post shuddered. Eli released the bridle. "My house is up the rise," he said. "You and the boy can get warm. The mare can go in the shed. I need Cedar Bluff. I heard you. Monday noon. I heard that too." She studied him as if trying to decide whether shelter was the beginning of another delay she could not afford. Eli pointed east. "Beyond the cottonwood line. There is a ridge road that reaches Cedar Bluff from the north. It is longer. If the snowmelt has not taken the Elk Cut Bridge, a rider can do it in a day and a half, and if it has, then no one is doing it in a day and a half." She looked at the river again. "What is your name?" she asked. "Eli Rourke." "Add Bell." She shifted the baby under her coat. "This is Theo." Eli nodded once. "Come inside, Mrs. Bell. I am not paying you for a bed. I did not ask you to. I pay my way. Then you can tell me what else you see wrong with my cable." That almost changed her expression. Almost. She led the mare toward the rise. The ferry house was not really a house. It was a long 2-room structure built from cottonwood logs and repaired in 3 different kinds of lumber by 3 different owners. One room held a stove, a table, 2 chairs, shelves of Ferry ledgers, and enough tools to repair most things that could break within a mile of the river. The other contained Eli's bed, a trunk, and a narrow bunk that had not been used since a survey crew passed through the previous summer. Ada stood just inside the door while the heat reached her. She did not sag with relief. She did not close her eyes. She simply became still. Eli had seen that kind of stillness in freight horses after a long pull. The body stopped before the mind trusted that it was allowed to. He took no pleasure in recognizing it. "The bunk room is yours," he said. "I will sleep here." Ada glanced around. "You live at the crossing year-round?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." She nodded as if filing the answer for later and carried Theo into the smaller room. Eli went back outside to the landing. He took a lantern, a hammer, and a wrench. The lifted strands were worse than he had thought. He ran a gloved thumb along the cable and felt 2 broken wires catch against the leather. Ada had seen it from 30 feet away in bad light. He had been standing beside it all morning. That irritated him. The fact that it should not have irritated him more. He worked until dusk, adding a temporary clamp and unloading the ferry platform so it could ride higher if the ice pressed against it. He pulled the freight chocks, the spare chain, 2 empty barrels, and a crate of horseshoes back onto land. By the time he returned to the house, Ada had put Theo near the stove on a folded blanket. The boy was awake. He had a round face, dark eyes, and the solemn concentration of someone recently introduced to the existence of iron stove doors. Ada had opened her canvas satchel on the table. Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth. She covered them when Eli entered. He hung his wet coat on the wall. "You do not have to hide them from me," he said. "I am not hiding them. You covered them. I keep them covered near a stove." That was sensible enough to end the subject. Eli put coffee on. Ada fed Theo from a small tin cup after nursing him, then accepted a bowl of beans without pretending she was not hungry. For several minutes they ate without speaking. The river could be heard through the walls, not the water itself. The ice. It complained in long shifting pressures beneath the wind. Ada looked toward the door every time the cable outside gave a low metallic tremor. "You listen to it in your sleep?" she asked. "Yes." "How long have you run the ferry?" 8 years. "You close every spring?" "For 4 years." She looked at him. He drank his coffee. She did not ask the obvious question. Instead she said, "The west anchor is sounder than the upstream one. You checked it?" "From the landing. You check everyone's equipment when they refuse you service." "Only the equipment that might kill me." Theo made a small sound from the blanket. Ada looked down at him immediately. The boy had found the edge of the blanket and was trying to put it into his mouth. She moved it away. He tried again. Eli watched the contest for several seconds. "Persistent," he said. "He has no reason not to be." "What does that mean?" "He has wanted food, warmth, sleep, and arms around him his entire life. So far, making noise has improved his circumstances every time." Eli looked at the child. "That is a dangerous lesson. It is an excellent lesson at 7 months. The corner of her mouth moved. This time he was certain of it. The sounds outside changed. Eli stood so quickly his chair hit the wall. He reached the door as the upstream anchor post split. The cable tore sideways. For 1 second, the ferry platform held against the bank. Then the ice caught its outer edge. The deck rotated downstream. A chain snapped. The whole platform lurched away from the landing, half sideways, dragging the failed cable behind it like a broken rein. Eli ran down the slope with the lantern swinging in his fist. Ada came to the doorway with Theo against her shoulder. The ferry struck a plate of ice 50 yards downstream. The plate rolled. The platform climbed onto it, tilted, and disappeared into the dark. The bell mounted at the far end of the deck gave one clear note as the ferry went over. Then there was only the river. Eli stopped at the empty landing. The lantern trembled in his hand. He stared downstream long after there was nothing left to see. Ada did not come beside him. She stayed back on firm ground. When he finally turned, she was watching his face. "I am sorry," she said. "It is timber and iron. It was your livelihood. It can be rebuilt." He walked past her toward the house. She followed. Inside, he took the ferry ledger from the shelf, opened to the current month, and drew a line through every booking for the next 2 weeks. Ada stood across the table. "The Ridge Road," she said. Eli closed the ledger. "Leave at first light. Take your mare. Follow the east bank north to the old survey marker, then turn toward Cottonwood Ridge. There is a line shack 12 miles in if you need shelter. Then Elk Cut. Yes, you said if the bridge is still there. Yes. She looked at him for a moment. You have been over that road this winter? No. Anyone? Not since the last heavy snow. She nodded. All right. Eli expected her to ask him to come. She did not. She wrapped the papers again, put them inside the satchel, and tightened the strap. I will be gone before sunrise, she said. You should wait for daylight. I am already one night behind. You will lose more time if your horse breaks a leg in the dark. I said before sunrise, not midnight, he almost argued. Instead, he looked at the satchel. What exactly happens Monday? Ada rested both hands on the table. My husband, Samuel, bought 60 acres on Cottonwood Draw from Grant Barlow 3 years ago. Installments. We paid the last one in November. We? Sam hauled timber. I kept the accounts and worked the team when he was gone. She glanced toward Theo. Sam died in January. A tree kicked back off a stump and crushed his chest. He lived until morning. Eli said nothing. Ada continued before sympathy could interrupt her. 3 weeks after the funeral, Barlow sent a man with a notice saying the final payment had never been made. According to him, the contract allows him to take the land back. Does it? If we had not paid, maybe, but we did. She tapped the oilcloth packet. I have the receipt Barlow signed. I have Sam's account book. I have a statement from the postmaster who witnessed the money order. Monday is the hearing. Barlow has an attorney. I have these, and if you are not there, then his attorney asks to proceed without me. Eli looked at the dark window. The river sounded louder without the cable holding anything against it. How far is Cottonwood Draw from here? 14 miles west of Cedar Bluff. You came from there? Yes. With a baby. And a horse. In March. Ada's eyes narrowed. If you are trying to decide whether I understand difficult travel, Mr. Rourke, decide quickly. I would like to sleep. He leaned back in his chair. The correct response would have been to let her go in the morning. The ridge road was hard but not impossible. Ada was competent. She knew horses. She had prepared. She had a reason to hurry and enough sense to see a bad cable from 30 feet away. She did not need a rescuer. She needed a route. Eli knew every route within 40 miles of Red Willow. He looked at the ferry ledger again. There was no ferry to operate tomorrow. I am going with you, he said. Ada's face remained still. I did not ask. I know. Why? Because the river took my work for the next 2 weeks, and because I know where the ridge road disappears under snow. That is not the whole answer. No. She waited. He did not give her the rest. After a moment she nodded once. Then we leave at first light. They left while the eastern sky was still gray. Eli rode his buckskin gelding, moss, and led a second pack horse carrying food, 2 wool blankets, rope, a small axe, and enough grain for one night. Ada rode her bay mare with Theo strapped securely against her and a broadcloth carrier beneath her coat. The cold had returned before dawn. That helped. Mud stiffened. Snow crust hardened. The land held their weight. For the first 6 miles, the ridge road was better than Eli had expected. They passed old cottonwoods with black water standing around their roots. Patches of winter grass showed through the snow. To the west, Red Willow moved between low banks and broken white sheets. Ada rode well, not prettily, efficiently. She kept her weight balanced, gave the mare room on uneven ground, and checked Theo without stopping every half mile. By mid-morning, Eli stopped worrying about whether she could manage the horse. He began worrying about Elk Cut. They reached the survey marker near noon. The post leaned 10 degrees east from Frost Heave, but the faded red paint was still visible. Eli turned them north. The road narrowed. At one point, a drift covered the track completely. Eli studied the fence posts and the shape of the land until he found the shallow swale where wagon wheels had packed the grass the previous fall. Ada watched him. You do that by memory? Mostly. What if your memory is wrong? I look for where the land agrees with me. She considered that. That sounds less confident than I expected. Confidence gets expensive out here. So does being wrong. Yes. The line shack appeared at 3 in the afternoon, a square of gray boards on the lee side of a rise. They stopped only long enough to water the horses from melted snow and feed Theo. Ada sat on an overturned bucket with her back to the wall while the baby drank. Eli checked the sky. Clouds were building from the northwest. Wet snow by evening, he thought. Maybe earlier. Ada followed his eyes. How far to Elk Cut? 6 miles. Cedar Bluff after that? 10 if the bridge is usable. And if it is not? He did not answer immediately. She adjusted Theo's blanket. How far? 17 around the head of the cut. Ada closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she said, Then we should see the bridge before dark. They rode on. The snow began 40 minutes later. Large flakes at first, soft and almost harmless, then smaller, harder snow driven sideways by the wind. The ridge lost its edges. Eli slowed. Ada did not complain. Theo woke and began making frustrated sounds inside her coat. She spoke to him quietly as they rode. Not soothing nonsense. Information. We are moving. You are warm. I know you dislike the wind. I also dislike the wind. Your opinion has been recorded. Eli looked over. You explain everything to him? Yes. He is 7 months old. He will eventually be 8. That almost made him laugh. It surprised him enough that he looked forward quickly, as if the road had caught him doing something private. They reached Elk Cut at dusk. The bridge was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The two timber approaches ended on opposite banks 40 feet apart. Between them, meltwater ran brown and fast through a channel that had widened beyond the old banks. One of the bridge stringers had lodged downstream against a cottonwood, pointing at the sky. Ada sat very still on her mare. Eli dismounted. He walked to the edge and looked up and down the cut. There was no safe ford within sight. The banks were soft. The water was too high for horses. The nearest shallow crossing he knew was 4 miles north, and he did not know whether it was still shallow. Behind them, the road was already disappearing under snow. Ada climbed down carefully with Theo in her arms. How long around? She asked. To the head of the cut, then south again? 6 or 7 hours in good ground. We do not have good ground. No, if we go north for the ford, maybe 2 hours. Maybe we find another channel we cannot cross. Ada looked at the broken bridge. Then she looked at Eli's pack horse. You brought rope. Yes. Enough to span this? Yes. Eli knew what she was thinking before she said it. No, you have not heard the question. I have. A hand line to cross on foot. Horses stay here. We come back for them later. No. She looked at the opposite bank. There is a standing cottonwood 10 yards back from the edge. I see it. You can throw a weighted line across. I can. Then why no? Eli looked at the water. 4 years vanished from the space between one breath and the next. Spring ice. A cable too tight. His sister May laughing at him from the wagon seat because he had told her the river looked ugly. Her husband saying they had already waited half a day. Eli deciding he could make one more crossing. The upstream rope parting, the wagon sliding. May's hand reaching once above the water, the sound of the bell as the ferry rolled. He had heard that bell again the night before. Ada's voice cut through it. Ellie. He realized she had never used his first name before. He looked at her. She had Theo against her chest. Snow was gathering on her shoulders. I am not asking you to put us on that water, she said. I am asking whether there is a way to cross it without lying to ourselves about the risk. He stared at her. She waited. That was the thing about competent people. They did not make danger smaller so courage could look bigger. Eli walked to the edge again. He studied the current. A line crossing was possible only if they could keep above the water and avoid the collapsing bank. The rope would need to be chest-high, tight, and anchored far enough back that the mud near the edge did not take the strain. He looked upstream. A narrow section of the cut curved around a gravel bar 50 yards north. Still dangerous, but the banks were lower and 2 cottonwoods stood opposite each other. Not here, he said. Ada followed his gaze. Up there? Maybe. Maybe is better than no. Maybe means I have not finished looking. For the first time since she arrived at Red Willow, Ada smiled without stopping herself. Good, she said. Finish looking. The crossing took almost 2 hours to prepare. Eli tied the main rope around a cottonwood well back from the near bank. He used a smaller line, weighted with a wrench, to throw across the cut. It took 6 tries before the wrench cleared the far bank and landed where Ada could reach it after they walked upstream to the narrow bend. She watched every knot, not suspiciously, attentively. When he cinched the final hitch, she touched the rope and tested it with both hands. Timber hitch? Anchor bend. Better for this? Better when the load can shift, she nodded. What goes first? I do. What if the far bank gives? Then you stay where you are. What if you fall? Same answer. What if you get across and I cannot? He looked at Theo. Ada followed his eyes. No, she said. I did not say anything. You were about to tell me to hand him across first. I was about to ask how you wanted to do it. That stopped her. Eli waited. She looked at the rope that cut, then down at her son. I cross with him, she said. He stays secured under my coat. I clip the safety line to my belt, not his carrier. If I slip, you pull me, not the baby. Eli nodded. That is what I would do. Good. He crossed first. The rope bowed under his weight even though he kept both boots on the muddy shelf where he could. The current reached his knees at the lowest point and hit hard enough to turn his hips downstream. He leaned into the line and moved one hand at a time. Halfway across, a piece of ice the size of a washbasin struck his thigh. His grip tightened. For one flashing instant he was 4 years younger again, then the ice spun away. He kept moving. On the far side he wrapped the rope around the cottonwood, took out the slack and braced. Ada stood across from him with Theo under her coat. The snow had begun to collect in her hair. "Wait," Eli called. She froze. He watched the water for a full minute. A pulse of debris passed through. Branches, ice, brown foam. Then the current cleared. Now, Ada stepped into the cut. She did not rush. That mattered. She kept both hands on the rope and placed each boot before shifting weight. When the water reached her knees, Theo began crying under her coat. The sound changed her breathing. Eli could see it, but she did not speed up. "Keep your shoulders square," he called. "I know. Water is stronger on your right. I know. You can tell me to stop talking when you get here. I intend to." 2 more steps. Then her left boot slid. Her body dropped sideways. The safety line snapped tight. Eli hauled. Ada's shoulder hit the main rope. Her free hand locked around it. For one terrible second, Theo's crying vanished beneath the sound of the water. Then Ada found her footing. She stood again. Eli did not pull her faster. He held steady. She took another step, then another. When she reached the far bank, he caught her forearm and pulled her onto frozen ground. She dropped to both knees immediately and opened her coat. Theo was wet only around the edge of his cap where snow had blown in. He was furious, red-faced, and breathing with excellent strength. Ada pressed her forehead to his for half a second. Then she looked up at Eli. "You can stop talking now," he laughed. It came out once, rough from disuse. Ada stared at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing. You are looking at me. I had not heard you do that." Neither had I. The horses remained on the south bank. Eli stripped the packs from them and pulled the supplies across one bundle at a time. He loosened the animals' tack, left them grain beneath a small stand of cottonwoods, and turned them back toward the line shack with the reins tied loosely enough to drag free if caught. Moss knew the road. Eli hated leaving him. He hated the idea of missing Ada's hearing more. They continued on foot. The snow thickened. By full dark, Cedar Bluff was still 8 miles away. Ada's boots were wet to the ankle. Eli's trousers had frozen stiff below the knees from the crossing. Theo had stopped crying and gone to sleep against his mother's chest. They found shelter in an abandoned freight shed beside the old ridge road. 3 walls were solid. The 4th had lost 2 boards. Eli covered the gap with a blanket and built a small fire in a rusted stove whose pipe still reached the roof. Ada sat on a crate and removed her boots. Her left ankle had begun to swell. Eli noticed. "So did I," she said. "I did not say anything. You have a face for saying things before you say them. Can you walk on it?" "Yes." That was not the question. She looked at the ankle. "Yes," slowly. He crouched in front of her and reached toward the boot. Ada pulled her foot back. "I can do it." He sat back on his heels. "All right." She unwound the wet stocking herself, checked the joint, flexed it, then wrapped it with a strip torn from an old flour sack in the shed. Eli watched without interfering. "You have done that before," he said. "Freight teams are full of opportunities to learn first aid badly." "Badly? I know enough to keep small injuries from becoming larger ones. That is not the same as being a doctor." Theo woke. Ada fed him while Eli melted snow and boiled coffee. The fire made the shed almost comfortable. Almost. Wind pushed powder through the gaps around the door. For a while the 3 of them listened to it. Then Ada said, "Who was on the ferry?" Eli kept his eyes on the stove. She did not soften the question by pretending not to know what she was asking. He appreciated that. "My sister," he said. "May and her husband, Daniel." "When?" "Spring of '83. Ada waited. Eli had told the story exactly twice in 4 years. Once to the territorial inspector, once to the minister who came after the bodies were found. Both times he had told it as a sequence of facts. Water level, wind direction, cable failure, number of passengers. This time the facts were not enough. "The river was high," he said. "I knew it was high. The upstream rope had been taking too much load all morning. I told them to wait. Did they refuse?" "They said they had already lost half a day." "And you took them?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at his hands. "Because I had crossed twice already. Because the ferry had held. Because I was 29 and good at my work, and I mistook being good at it for having authority over the river. Ada said nothing. The line parted near midstream. The deck turned. Their wagon went first. Daniel jumped. May did not have time. Eli swallowed. I got hold of the downstream cable. I do not remember how. By the time I reached the bank, they were gone. The stove clicked as the metal heated. Theo made a small sleeping sound. Ada looked at the fire. You closed every spring after that. Yes. Even when the river was safe. I decide when it is safe. That is not what I asked. He looked at her. She held his gaze. No, he said, not always. Ada adjusted Theo higher on her shoulder. My husband died under a tree he had felled 100 times in smaller versions, she said. He saw the trunk twist. He thought he knew where it would go. He was wrong by less than a yard. Eli listened. For the first month after he died, I could not look at an axe without wanting to throw it into a well. Then I needed firewood. Her voice remained level. So I split wood. That is different. Yes, she said. It is. I did not cause Sam's death. The words were precise enough to hurt without cruelty. Eli looked away. Ada continued. But I learned something I think you already know. Refusing every dangerous thing does not make the dangerous thing disappear. It just means fear gets to make decisions without being questioned. Eli watched a coal settle in the stove. You crossed that cut today because you were careful, she said. You did not cross it because you forgot May. He said nothing for a long time. Then you always talk this much when someone gives you shelter. Only when they make coffee this week. He looked at the cup in his hand. That is slander. That is evidence. Theo opened his eyes. He looked directly at Eli. Then he reached one hand toward the tin cup. Ada caught his wrist. No, Theo disagreed. He supports my position, Eli said. He supports possession of the cup. Those are different things. The baby began to complain. Eli took the cup out of reach. Theo looked personally betrayed. For a few minutes the shed held something that had not been there before. Not comfort exactly. Room for grief to exist without controlling every object around it. They slept in shifts. Before dawn, the snow stopped. The world outside was blue and white, the storm already moving east. Ada stood carefully on her wrapped ankle. It held. They had 8 miles to Cedar Bluff. They also had no horses. Eli studied the road. Fresh snow covered the mud, but underneath it the ground had frozen hard again. That helps, he said. Ada tightened Theo's carrier. How much? Enough. They started walking. At first Ada limped. After a mile she found a rhythm that hid most of it. Eli did not pretend not to notice. He also did not tell her to stop. At a rise 3 miles from Cedar Bluff they saw wagon tracks cutting across the road. Fresh. A freight wagon had passed after the snow. Eli crouched and touched the edge of the rut. Maybe an hour ahead. Ada looked toward town. Can we catch it? Not on foot. She scanned the horizon. A low whistle carried through the cold air. Then another. A team. Eli stepped into the center of the road and waved his hat. The wagon came into view 10 minutes later, 2 draft horses pulling a load of seed sacks and fencing wire. The driver was a broad-shouldered man Eli knew from the crossing. Rourke, he called. Where in God's name is your ferry? Halfway to Nebraska by now. The driver slowed. Eli pointed to Ada. She has business at the courthouse before noon. The man looked at the baby, Ada's wrapped ankle, then Eli's frozen trousers. I have room on top if nobody minds sitting on oats. Ada was already moving toward the wagon. I have sat on worse. They reached Cedar Bluff at 11:23. The town looked larger than Ada had imagined and smaller than the word courthouse deserved. One main street. A hotel, a general store, a feed yard, a church with a crooked steeple. The courthouse was a square 2-story brick building with muddy steps and a flag snapping above the roof. Ada climbed down from the wagon without waiting for Eli's hand. Then her ankle buckled. He caught her elbow. She steadied herself. Thank you, she said, not embarrassed, not apologizing, just accurate. She checked Theo, checked the satchel, and walked toward the courthouse. Eli followed as far as the bottom step. Ada turned. You are not coming in? I can, but... He looked at the building. This part is yours. Ada studied him. Then she nodded. Yes, she said, it is. She started up the steps. Eli watched her reach the door. Then she stopped and looked back. I may need someone to hold Theo. Eli blinked. Ada raised one eyebrow. That is not the same as speaking for me. No, he said. He went up the steps. Inside, the courthouse smelled of coal smoke, wet wool, and paper. A clerk directed them to a second-floor room where 6 people sat on benches facing a long table. Grant Barlow was already there. Eli recognized him immediately. Most people within 30 miles of Red Willow did. Barlow owned cattle, land, and the habit of taking up more physical space than was required. He was in his 50s, heavy through the shoulders, with a trimmed gray beard and a black coat that had not spent the morning crossing floodwater. Beside him sat an attorney with a leather case. Barlow saw Ada. His face changed, not guilt, calculation. "You made it," he said. Ada unbuttoned her coat. "Yes." Barlow looked at Theo, then at Eli. "I heard the ferry was closed." "It is gone," Eli said. Barlow's attorney leaned toward him and whispered something. Ada did not look at either man again. She opened the satchel. The oilcloth inside was dry. For the first time since Red Willow, her hands shook, only slightly. Eli noticed because he had been watching hands around ropes and reins his whole life. Ada noticed him noticing. She drew one breath and put both palms flat on the packet. The shaking stopped. A bailiff called the room to order. The territorial judge entered. The hearing began. Barlow's attorney spoke first. He made the dispute sound small. That was his skill. A contract. A missed installment. A property owner exercising a written remedy. An unfortunate death that did not change the terms of an agreement. He did not call Ada dishonest. He did something more useful. He made her absence from the paperwork sound like proof that she did not understand it. Samuel Bell had signed the purchase agreement. Samuel Bell had conducted most of the business with Grant Barlow. Samuel Bell was dead. Mrs. Bell had no canceled bank draft, no registered deed, and no attorney. Eli sat on the back bench with Theo on his knee. The boy had discovered the buttons on Eli's coat and was pulling them with methodical interest. Eli let him. At the long table, Ada did not move while the attorney spoke. When he finished, the judge asked her to come forward. Ada carried the oilcloth packet to the table. "Mrs. Bell," the judge said, "do you understand the claim Mr. Barlow is making?" "Yes, sir." "Tell me what you believe happened." Ada unfolded the purchase contract. Then she told him. Not the whole history of her marriage, not the funeral, not the snow road. She told him what mattered. Samuel and Ada had agreed to buy the Cottonwood Draw parcel 3 years earlier. The installments were listed in Sam's account book because Ada had kept the account book herself. Each payment had been entered on the day it was sent. Barlow had signed receipts for all but the final one. For that payment, Sam had sent a postal money order in November because Barlow had been away buying cattle. Ada placed the receipt on the table. The judge picked it up. Barlow's attorney stood. "My client does not dispute that a money order was purchased. We dispute that it was received as final payment on this contract." Ada looked at Barlow. Then he should explain the letter. She took out a second paper. This one had been folded so many times the creases had gone soft. The judge read it. Then he looked at Barlow. "What is this?" Barlow cleared his throat. "A note I sent Bell." Ada spoke before the attorney could. "Read the last 2 lines, please." The judge did. "I have your November money order. When the weather clears, we will finish the deed work." The room went quiet. Barlow's attorney asked to examine the letter. Ada handed it over. He studied the signature. "My client may have acknowledged receipt of a payment without agreeing that the account was fully satisfied." Ada opened Sam's ledger. "The amount on the money order is the amount listed as due on the contract, according to your husband's book, according to Mr. Barlow's own figures." She turned the contract toward the judge and pointed to the payment schedule. The judge looked from one document to the other. Barlow shifted in his chair. The attorney tried a different path. "Mrs. Bell, since your husband's death, have you remained continuously on the property?" "No." "How long were you away?" 12 days. "And where did you go?" "To my sister's house after the funeral. I needed help with my son while I arranged the hearing. So the property was unattended. My neighbor, Mr. Haas, fed the stock and checked the house. But you were not there." "No." The attorney let that answer sit as though it proved something larger. Then he asked, "Do you intend to operate that property yourself?" "Yes." "With an infant?" "Yes." "Without your husband?" Ada looked at him. "Yes." The attorney turned slightly toward the judge. "My point is that Mr. Barlow has legitimate concern regarding the purchaser's ability to satisfy the obligations attached to the property." Ada's hand settled on the contract. "The obligation was to pay him," she said. The attorney looked back at her. She continued, "He was paid. That does not answer whether you can manage. I am not asking this court to decide whether I can manage a farm." The room became still. Ada's voice did not rise. I am asking whether a man may take back land after accepting the final payment because the person who handed him the money died before the deed was finished." Eli stopped breathing for a moment, not because the line was dramatic, because it made the whole matter impossible to hide inside other questions. The judge looked at Barlow. "Mr. Barlow, did you write the letter?" Barlow hesitated. "Yes." "Did you receive the money order?" "Yes." "Was the amount the final scheduled installment under this agreement?" Barlow's attorney began to stand. The judge lifted one hand. "I asked Mr. Barlow." Barlow looked down at the papers. "Yes." The judge let the answer settle. The rest of the hearing was paperwork. Dates. The postmaster's statement. A question about a small fee Barlow claimed remained unpaid. Ada had an answer for each point. Not perfect records. Enough. Before 1 o'clock, the judge ruled that Barlow had accepted the final scheduled payment and could not treat the land as unpaid because Samuel Bell had died before the deed work was finished. Any separate fee dispute could be handled separately. The land contract itself stood. Ada gathered the papers slowly. Her hands were steady. Barlow stopped beside her on his way out. "I could have made you an offer," he said. "You still can," Ada answered, "if I ever decide to sell." He left without another word. Eli was waiting on the bench with Theo. One button was missing from his coat. Theo held it in his fist. Ada looked from the button to Eli. "He took that from you?" He negotiated aggressively. "You had 4 this morning. I have 3 now." Theo tried to put the button in his mouth. Ada took it away and replaced it with the wooden Ferry tally chip from Eli's pocket. The boy accepted the trade. Ada turned the chip over in her fingers. "Red Willow Ferry. 1 crossing. I am temporarily unable to honor it." She laughed. The sound was lighter than anything Eli had heard from her since the river. Then she looked at the papers in her lap. "The ruling does not plant the north field. No. It does not mend the fence. No. It does not fix the barn roof. No." Ada nodded. "Good." He raised an eyebrow. "You are the first person today who has not told me everything will be all right. I do not know that it will. Neither do I." She tucked the tally chip into Theo's blanket. "But I know what I am allowed to work on now." That afternoon they arranged separate routes home. A freight wagon would take Ada west toward Cottonwood Draw in the morning. Eli rented a horse to go back for Moss and the pack animal at Elk Cut. At the boarding house door, Ada held out her hand. "Thank you for the road," she said. "Not for the hearing. Not for saving her. For the road." Eli took her hand. "You had the direction. You knew where the ground would hold." They stood there a moment longer than a formal goodbye required. Then Asa went inside with Theo. Eli rode east before dawn. By the time he reached Elk Cut, the water had dropped enough that the rope crossing looked smaller than it had in the storm. His horses had found their way back to the line shack, hungry but unhurt. At Red Willow, pieces of the ferry had collected along the bank. A railing, 2 planks, an iron cleat. The bell was gone. Eli spent 3 days salvaging what he could. On the 4th, he dug out the failed anchor post. The outside looked sound. The inside was rotten around the iron staple. He sat beside the hole with the broken timber across his knees and thought about Ada noticing the lifted cable strands before he had. The ferry had not failed because the river was evil. It had failed because danger had been visible and he had not seen all of it. That mattered. So did the fact that seeing danger did not require surrendering every crossing forever. Eli rode to Cedar Bluff and ordered new oak anchor posts, fresh cable, and heavier hardware. When the replacement cable arrived, he inspected every foot before it went up. He still closed the crossing whenever the current or ice exceeded what he judged safe. But the rule belonged to the river again, not to a date on the calendar, and not to the worst day of his life. By late April, the new ferry frame was nearly finished. A freight wagon came down the west road carrying seed sacks, fencing wire, and Ada Bell with Theo on her lap. Theo still had the tally chip. Ada carried something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Eli. Inside was the old ferry bell. Mud dried around the rim. One side was scraped bright. For a moment, Eli could only hold it. "Mr. Haas found it caught in willow roots below his pasture," Ada said. "He knew it was yours." Eli turned the bell over. The bracket was broken, but the clapper remained. "Thank you. You owe me 1 crossing. That bell is worth more than 1 crossing. I keep excellent accounts." He looked at the seed sacks. "You are planting. I am trying. The north fence? Half repaired. The roof? Patched." She looked at the new ferry. "You decided to rebuild." "I did. Is the river safe today?" "No." "Good. She stayed for noon dinner beside the unfinished landing. 3 days later, Eli rode to Cottonwood Draw. He told himself he was returning a Ferry tally chip he had found under the workbench. Ada pointed to the identical chip already in Theo's hand. Eli looked at the one in his palm. I appear to have made an accounting error. Serious. I may need coffee while I investigate. Coffee costs more than a tally chip. I replaced my coat button. Ada smiled. That was the beginning of the part neither of them could blame on weather, courts, or broken bridges. Eli helped set 2 fence posts because Ada could not hold them plumb and tamp soil at the same time. Ada repaired a split harness trace because she was better with leather than he was. He brought flour when he was already going to Cedar Bluff. She sent preserved apples back in a jar that needed returning. By June, the ferry was operating again. By July, the completed deed for Cottonwood Draw arrived. Ada read it twice at her kitchen table, folded it into the same oilcloth that had crossed Elk-Cut, and said, I am keeping the land. Eli nodded. I may fail at it, she said. Yes. She looked at him sharply. He continued. Crops fail, wells fail, people get hurt. None of that means Barlow should have decided the ending before you had the chance to work. Ada looked down at the deed. Then she put her hand on the table between them. Eli covered it with his. Neither moved away. Theo woke in the next room and ended the silence by demanding supper. By autumn, Eli stopped pretending his visits were accidental. He asked Ada if he could court her properly. She said he had already been doing a poor version of it for months and she would allow him to improve. He did, slowly. He learned to ask what kind of help she wanted before offering it. She learned that sometimes his silence meant thought, and sometimes it meant the river had brought May back into the room. Neither demanded that the other stop having a past. Winter closed Red Willow in December. Eli shut the ferry when shelf ice began building around the landings. This time he checked the anchors, measured the current, watched the ice, and made the decision he would have made for any other dangerous job. Then he rode to Cottonwood Draw for supper. In February, Ada found him repairing the barn latch while Theo stood beside him holding a wooden peg. The boy was 14 months old and newly committed to walking wherever adults preferred he did not. Ada leaned against the doorway. Are you going to keep riding 14 miles every time you want supper? Eli looked up. Do you want me to stop? No. Then I can improve the arrangement. How? He stood. Theo grabbed his trouser leg. I can marry you, Eli said, if you want the same thing. Ada stared at him. That is your proposal? It contains the important information. It is missing decoration. I can go outside and come back with my hat in my hands. That would be ridiculous. I agree. She crossed the barn and took his hand. Yes, she said. I want the same thing. They married in May at the small church in Cedar Bluff. Ada kept Cottonwood Draw in her name. Eli kept the ferry contract. They spent the first season learning how to make one household out of 2 useful places. The arrangement was not effortless. There were arguments about money, fences, schedules, and how close Theo could stand to the landing while holding an adult hand. On that last question, both adults said no. Theo considered them unreasonable. The following spring, Red Willow broke early. Eli closed the crossing for 6 days. On the 7th morning, the main ice had cleared. The current was fast but within the safe mark he had set the year before. The new oak anchors were dry above their stone packing. The cable showed no lifted strands. He checked it twice. Then he opened the ferry. Ada arrived before the first freight wagon. Theo was almost 2 now, steady on his feet and certain that every mechanical object existed for him to investigate. A new brass bell hung from the landing post. The old damaged bell rested on a shelf inside the ferry house. Theo saw the bell rope and reached for it. No, Ada said. Eli looked at the secured platform, the clear landing, and the open water. Then he looked at the boy. Once, he said. Our son, Ada corrected quietly. Eli met her eyes. Our son. He lifted Theo high enough to reach the rope. The boy grabbed it with both hands. Ada rested one hand on Eli's arm. Theo pulled.